welcome to Solutions for Seniors. I'm Linda Pellerin, the Executive Director of the Shepherd Center of Charlotte. We're an organization that serves seniors in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg community, and what we try to do is offer them programs and services so they can stay in their home environment for as long as possible. And this show is designed to give you information about what's going on in the community that can help seniors. So if you're a senior, this is the place for you, or if you if you have a parent or a grandparent, please tell them about the Shepherd Center and Solutions for Seniors. Our guest today is Sabrina Winters, and she's an attorney. And she deals primarily with financial things for seniors. And there's a lot of stuff going on out there that, we get questions all the time, and I don't know why, maybe because of stress. There's a lot of widows out there. Mm-hmm. The men sometimes die before the women do. And I was just talking to a CPA this morning, and I've had to refer a couple seniors to him. They had their taxes done through the AARP tax program, mm-hmm. which we provide for them, or we help with every February through April. And some things came back, and these little ladies, had never had to deal with any kind of finances before. And so, they called and they said, we can't go back to the tax program, but I have the CPA that I can refer them to. And he was telling me he was able to help them out. And we talked about how, some of the widows are really lost when the husband dies. Mm-hmm. Maybe they never had to handle finances before. Maybe they didn't have any kind of plans in place. Tell us a little bit about what you can do to help seniors mm-hmm. Before they get to that point where all of a sudden, they're like, oh, I'm confused, I don't know what to do. And, mm-hmm. maybe all the money switched over from the couple to just the woman, and she doesn't know. Sometimes they don't even know where it is.
Yep, it's a big issue. First, thank you so much for inviting me to be on the show. I really appreciate that. When it comes to seniors, at every level, at every stage of our lives, there's something that we need. We need something more in our 20s that we don't even think about when we're in our 40s and our 50s. When it comes to the seniors planning for their estate, there's a lot of things that they need to be on top of that maybe nobody made them aware of. They've gone through all these years never having issues, never thinking there was going to be a problem, and then bam, here it is. A big issue, like you pointed out, was now there's a widow or a widower, and they didn't know where anything was. And the first thing I always tell, even my younger clients, is you both, as husband and wife, need to know everything about your finances. No secrets, nothing under the table. Everybody needs to know, because either one of them can go first. So if there's a wife that's living after the husband passes away, she needs to know how to get on with her life. She needs to know who to call for that life insurance policy, because oftentimes that's the cash that she needs immediately to continue living. Sometimes there's a life insurance policy that continues to pay for the mortgage. So you need to know where that is. You need to know the CPA to call immediately. Knowing everything up front just makes it easier later. Keeping everything organized. Now, I have kids call me all the time, oh, my parents need a will, they don't have anything in place, what do I do? Oftentimes, it's just approaching the parents that's the most difficult portion of it. They sort of feel like, I'm fine, I don't need your help, I want to keep control, I don't want anybody knowing my business. But I often tell them the way to approach them is let them know it's not so much about you wanting control over them and you wanting their money when they're gone. It's about making sure that their wishes are followed and that they keep their control as long as they can. And usually when you approach a senior that way, they feel a little bit more at ease. They don't feel like you're trying to take them for a ride or you're being nosy and you want to know all their things. You're there to help them. And as a child, sometimes approaching it that way helps them to feel a little more comfortable, feel better about divulging some of their assets. So being completely prepared and aware of what's going on, I would say probably is the number one thing that they should be concerned about. Also, I tell them, as long as you've got your capacity, you still have the ability to put something in writing. It's never too late. It doesn't matter if you're 40 or 90. If you've got your capacity, you can put these documents into place. So even if it's just a will or if it's updating, sometimes they've had these documents in place for 30 or 40 years and they've never looked at it again. I've reviewed wills and trusts for seniors that still have guardianship appointments for their children, and nobody told them that they had to redo them or even look at them. Some of my clients did it and left it in a drawer and never thought about it again. So the third thing I would say is make sure you're on top of everything. You sell assets, named people pass away. Sometimes there's incapacity for people who might be in control of your finances. Keeping on top of what you currently have is really, really important.
Well, this happened to us, and I have to admit, I'm sorry to admit this, but my husband and I, we pulled out our will and we realized that we had our children under the guardianship of his sister who had since passed away. And of course, and our children were adults. We're looking at, this is really old. We need to update it. So we did. I have a question, and this just happened recently. We have a friend who moved here maybe 3 or 4 years ago from New York State. And when he was in New York State, he and his live-in partner went on to, I think it was LegalZoom.com, and they did up a will for him. And he was asking me the other day, he said, is that will still valid? Because I'm living in North Carolina now. And I'm like, I don't think so. And he doesn't have a lot of money. And he doesn't even have a computer now. Because his friend that he had done all of this with has since passed away. And so he really needs to redo his will, doesn't he?
Yeah, first you said a bad word, LegalZoom.
Yeah.
I am not a proponent of do-it-yourself because there really is no such thing as a simple will. You really do get what you pay for. The program on these types of do-it-yourself documents, they're asking you questions based on your input. So if you're inputting one thing and maybe you needed to input something else, that computer program isn't going to do the follow-up for you. So oftentimes when you think it's a simple will, it's really not, because one really doesn't exist. And on the other hand, it doesn't really matter how big of an estate you have, how many assets, how rich, poor, wealthy you are. It has everything to do with the fact that you're going to die one day. And if you care about who gets anything that you have, you need to put that in writing, and it needs to be done properly. We have very, very simple requirements in North Carolina on what the clerk's office in the probate department looks for to probate a will. Those requirements are so simple, yet oftentimes these do-it-yourself programs don't do that follow-up. For example, we need 2 witnesses to see the executor sign, for example, his will. There has to be certain language associated with that witnessing. Some of these programs, once they spit it out, they send you the directions, but then it's up to the person to go get those witnesses, and oftentimes they just don't do that. Either they didn't read what came with it, or they weren't sure really what was supposed to be done, or they didn't know where they could get the witnesses. So the follow-through is important when it comes to estate planning. When I sit with a client, I'm listening to what they're saying, not just to my questions, but we're having an open conversation. That conversation is what leads me to ask other questions sometimes, on top of the general questions that I ask. So for example, if I'm sitting with a client and we're talking about her daughter, and her daughter's got some kids, and we'll talk about the grandkids. Well, now in conversation I find out that one of the grandchildren is on SSI. Well, my client already told me that she wants to provide for that grandson. Well, we have to make sure there's certain language in that will or trust that allows that grandchild to keep his qualification but still allow them to be inheriting. Some of these programs don't go that next step. So I always say you get what you pay for. Never have a simple will. One really doesn't exist. And it doesn't matter how much money you have. You need to make sure the plan is in place. Not just a plan, but what comes after that with the execution, the witnessing, making sure that your assets match what your plan says. You might think in your will you say, I want everything to go to my husband, but you've got some assets that name beneficiaries on that. Well, the computer program's not going to ask you that, and they're probably not going to tell you and remind you, go check on those beneficiary designations. So even though we can probate an out-of-state will, it's always a good idea to have it reviewed by a North Carolina attorney just to make sure that the execution is done properly and what it says is still what that client wants.
What surprises me is I've talked to some seniors. I mean, I talk to a lot of seniors, that's what we do, but I've talked to some seniors who admit to me that they don't even have a will.
Mm-hmm.
What happens in North Carolina if you die and you don't have a will?
Essentially, North Carolina has written our wills through the statutes. So if there is nothing in writing, we look to the statutes of North Carolina that tell us who to look for and in what order and how much they get, what the percentage is. So, essentially, a surviving spouse might be sharing real property with their minor children. That could happen. It all depends on who is alive when that person passes. Now, not having something in writing is absolutely a choice. Some people just choose not to care, not to be concerned with it, and that is a valid decision. If you ask me or any other professional in this field, they're going to say, but if you want the control and you want to make sure that what happens to your estate is what you want, you need to get that in writing, regardless of how big your estate is or how big your family is. You're the one that should be making the decisions and keeping that control. North Carolina also doesn't care about charities and tax planning. That's not within their statute. So if you end up having a taxable estate, there's nothing in the statutes that will protect those assets. You have to have language in your will or trust that says this is what happens if my estate is a certain size.
Yeah. Interesting.
So a very opposite outcome can happen if you don't have something in writing.
Now, what about the people who just, all of a sudden they find out that, maybe they've got like a month to live or something, and they just scribble out something. This is what I want.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, is that valid? Can you take that somewhere and say, okay, this is, can the family say this is their will?
Yes, but there's certain requirements that have to be followed with something like that. If it literally is what they call a deathbed will and you verbally said it, there's certain requirements. If you're handwriting it, regardless of whether you think you're going to pass away in a month or 2 years, you still need essentially the same requirements that you would need for a will that either I did or they got off of the computer.
So you still need 2 witnesses?
Yes, it depends on the circumstances that it's created, and it also depends on how it's created. So oftentimes it still needs those 2 witnesses and the executor to sign something.
Now, do they have to be notarized too, or?
It's not written in the statutes, but yes, if you've got the 2 witnesses, then a notary would be required if there's language that goes along with the witnessing signature. So there's things that need to be in there that warrant something else happening. To be on the safe side, most attorneys are always going to have a self-proving affidavit that essentially says, as the witnesses, he could speak, he could write, he could read English, he knew who we were, and he knew what he was doing. That's what the language says, and then the witnesses are signing it. And then there's a notary that just notarizes everybody.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so what do you recommend? Excuse me. What do you recommend for seniors? Say a senior comes to you. What are the first things that you want to look at, and what do you recommend for them?
Well, first I always ask, do you have anything in writing? If they tell me yes, let's just take a look at it, because that might help me figure out what your mindset was when you first did that and where you're at now and what we need to change. If they don't have anything in writing, I would absolutely say you have to get something down. And it's not just a will or a trust. They need healthcare powers of attorney, financial powers of attorney, and a living will if they want. As we get older, there's more of a chance that we're going to get sick and somebody's going to need to help us, whether it's help us with our finances or help us make a medical decision when we can. And the chances are greater when we get into the senior age. So having that document allows the client to keep their control and have somebody make a medical decision for them that they would have made if they could do it themselves. And it's so important, once that all those documents are put into place, that somebody knows that they have them. If none of their kids knows and nobody knows that they have it, then it's no good. You know, they might end up in the hospital and something needs to be done medically. If we can't find the healthcare power of attorney, there's going to be a potential issue on who gets to make the decisions now. So no, having one is the biggest issue. Not having all the proper documents are potentially an issue as well. So I would recommend having all those and making sure somebody knows where they are. And typically in the senior community, they're seeing the same physician more often than maybe I or somebody younger than me would. They're going to the same one. It's a good practice to have a copy of your healthcare power left at your physician's office, just in case something might happen while you're there or at the hospital. They already know, let's call the physician, they've got something on record for them.
Now, my parents have given me copies of their healthcare wishes and everything, and there's a do not resuscitate thing and all of that. But they're in Vermont, and I'm here in North Carolina, and I had them give me a copy, you know, just in case.
Right.
But what if I'm not there physically? I mean, can I? And let's just say, heaven forbid, one of them is in the hospital and maybe in a coma or something, and I call the hospital and say, wait a minute, there's a she has a DNR or he has a DNR. What do I do in that case? I say, I have a copy of it right here. Maybe I can electronically get it to them or something.
I can't comment on how another state would accept a copy, but let's face it, most people that are in the Charlotte area, most of us are from somewhere else, so we don't have immediate family here. In North Carolina, it is appropriate to have an out of North Carolina agent. So it's fine that, you know, maybe I've got a sister that lives outside North Carolina and that's completely appropriate. Normally, it's used in more of an emergency situation. So they understand that you can't physically drive and give them an original. As long as you can provide a copy making that decision, then the institution's job is then to follow up with the original. But we want to make sure that something's in place so you can make those decisions. As long as you show proof, from my understanding, that's really all that they need at that very moment.
Right. Now, is it possible, and you may not be able to answer this because it is in other states, in Vermont, or in some cases it might even be Massachusetts, they're right on a little corner right there. And my mom goes to Massachusetts hospital and my dad goes to a Vermont hospital. But is it possible for them to have something on file with the hospital? And so the hospitals do let you do that?
Normally when you enter the hospital, they're always going to ask you, do you have a healthcare power of attorney? If you say no, they've got one ready for you to sign. And it's typically used just for that reason that you're in the hospital. It is completely appropriate to carry yours with you and give it to the physician that's there at the hospital and keep one there. Not a problem. The only thing I would suggest is if they ever end up altering it in some way, to remember to give them another copy. And what I would also say is, you know, as we get older and we retire, we tend to travel with our spouses together more so than we did pre-retirement. Always having a second person named is a really good idea. Something could happen to both of you while you're driving or flying to that vacation of a lifetime. You want somebody as a backup that more likely isn't going to be traveling with you or isn't going to be with you so often, so that if that happens to both of you, you've got a backup that can make that decision for you.
Now, I've got to tell you, I've had major surgery a couple times, and they come at you with this healthcare power of attorney. And I'm like, you know, are they telling me I'm not going to make it? You know, it's really not a fun thing to have to deal with right before major surgery.
You are right.
But it is nice to have one, you know, that you already have in place. So
it's really depressing talking about death and illness, and I've been doing it for almost 14 years, so I've learned how to approach it in a nice way, and we sort of try to make a light heart of it while we're having our consult, because it's very hard to think of your own immortality and you getting sick and, you know, maybe leaving grandkids behind. It's very difficult. But opening up and understanding why it's important usually tends to make for a better relationship, and understanding, hey, you know, anything could happen, and I'm not talking about it, I'm going to die tomorrow, because I hear that a lot. I didn't want to talk about this because I just feel like as soon as it's out in the universe, something is going to happen to me. And we all think about that, about something at some point of our lives. But I can guarantee you, just because you put it out there, it doesn't mean that you're going to die.
Right.
It just means that you're caring about your family, and you want to make sure that your wishes are carried through. And honestly, it's not a document you're going to read every night. Once it's in place, I usually say, look at it every 3 or 4 years. If there's a life-changing event, you lose a spouse, maybe you lose a child, maybe there's an illness in the family, we need to update our wishes on our healthcare power. Those are absolutely the times that you want to make sure that you review it, making sure that it still says what you want it to say, and that it's still going to work the way you want it to work. Because signing it and sticking it in a drawer and never looking at it again is not the best way to make sure that your wishes are carried through.
And I have to tell you, I remember asking my mom about her funeral service, what would you like, and her response is always, I don't care, I'll be dead. And I'm like, well, that really helps me a lot. I'm like, okay, but the biggest thing is, and I've asked both my parents, they're both 87, and I'm very fortunate to still have them around. Do you want to be cremated, or do you want the regular thing? I said, no, that's important. I said, I want to make sure that you're okay, that you tell me what you want. So that, I said, because I'm inclined to cremate them. And I said, so if you don't want that, I said, you need to tell me, and they've both adamantly said, no, do not cremate us. So at least I have that.
And now you know.
And now I know.
Yeah.
But it's something where, I asked my mom, what kind of music would you like, and all of this stuff, and she said, I don't care, I'll be dead.
And again, that is a completely valid choice for so many people. They feel like, I'm not here anymore, you guys do what you need to do, you're the ones here.
Right.
But there are ways, that's part of an estate plan too, is you can go pre-plan your funeral. You can prepay it as well. You can pick out the music. You can write your own obituary. You can do almost anything to pre-plan. And what I usually like to just encourage clients to think about is, think about it as the biggest gift you can give your family. You completely took this out of their hands 100%. Now, all they have to do is carry your wishes through, and they can celebrate your life, not having to pick out the mass cards and the readings. I had to do it for an uncle, had to do it for my one of my sister's stillborns, and I had to do it for a father-in-law. It is very, very difficult.
Especially when it's right, when it's just happened. It is very
Absolutely.
difficult. And
I'm in the field, and it was still hard for me because you're always thinking about what would they want. So
yeah. Well, all right, let's just say someone watches this show and they've decided they want to come and see you. How long is the initial consultation, roughly? So they kind of know how much to plan for and everything.
I've tried to make the consult shorter than I've normally had them. And one of the reasons is I send out a package of information. And they're filling out their assets, and they're filling out their family history. That usually cuts off about 30 minutes of them sitting there listening to me. Okay, so tell me your checking accounts, how many kids do you have, all their birth dates. So they're getting some information on what they're going to hear me talk about, so that's kind of putting them a little bit more at ease. Typical consult be about an hour, hour and a half, and again, that can vary between clients. Some clients have done a lot of homework and know exactly what I'm going to say and know exactly what they want to say. And other clients, hey, my daughter told me I really need one and she's right, and I just need you to sort of guide me through it. And so that one might be a longer consult. But I make sure that before they leave my office, they absolutely understand what their options are, and that not doing one is also an option.
Okay, final words. What do you have to say, to seniors out there who maybe don't have a plan in place?
I say plan, plan, plan. There's nothing worse than leaving your family behind and not knowing what they need to do. Keep your control. It doesn't matter if you're in a coma or you can't speak your wishes. Your control is important to you, and you can keep it that way. And your wishes can be followed through even when you can't. So plan, plan, plan. It's the best way, to make sure that end of life wishes are carried through, and what happens to you after you pass away, you're protecting your family. It's one of the biggest gifts you can give them.
When picking out an executor of your estate, some people struggle over this. You know, it may be a child, maybe they have no children, it may be like a distant relative or something, but they really struggle. What should they look for in picking out someone to carry out their plans?
Well, certainly somebody that is able to understand that they don't have to go it alone. There's nothing in the statute that says an executor has to hire an attorney. In my opinion, it's a really good idea because I've reviewed estates that didn't have an attorney help them, and oftentimes it takes a lot longer for me to come in the middle than if I came in at the beginning. Somebody who understands assets, how to collect them, accounting things. If they're doing it alone, that's somebody that you want to make sure can understand that. If they're hiring somebody like me or another good firm in the area, then that firm's going to do all of the legwork. And it's okay that they live out of state. Almost everything can be done via the mail, both with the executor in the attorney's office as well as the executor with the courts. Unless there is litigation, mostly there's never an in-court appearance. A lot of it can just be done through the mail.
Okay, I went to an estate sale over the weekend, and
Oh, those are fun.
But you know, it was kind of sad because it was like the entire house, everything in the entire house was for sale, and I'm like, this poor, and I'm pretty sure it was a woman, this poor woman lived in this house for a long time, I think, considering the stuff that was there.
Yeah.
And I'm like, and someone else walked by me and said, this is really sad. And it was sad to see the family just selling everything. I'm sure they went through and picked out a few things that they wanted, but that part of it is really sad. And it's nice if there is a plan in place where the family doesn't have to do something like that.
Because sometimes the estate sales are needed to make money for the estate.
Yes.
And so if they had planned it a little bit better, they might have had a life insurance policy that would pay off the bills so that the family didn't need to go through that. And again, it's the family that's doing all that. You know, it's the children, it's the surviving spouse. And it's not easy watching your parents' things go out the door or a loved one's things go out the door to a complete stranger. But sometimes that needs to be done.
That happened with my mother-in-law, and it really was. I just couldn't stay around that. You know? It was just like I had gotten, the things that I wanted and everything, but then the rest of the stuff went up for sale.
You just can't watch.
So, yeah. Well, Sabrina, thank you so much for joining us.
Mine.
And I
Thank
think what you had to say has been very informative, and it'll get people at least to start thinking about, getting a plan in place if they don't already have one, and if they do have one, to look at it and make sure it's updated. You're saying every 3 to 4 years, take a look.
At the minimum, unless some other life-altering event happens, you're good with about 3 or 4 years.
Okay, super, super. Well, I really appreciate it. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
And I will see everyone again next month. Thank you.